All right, everyone. Hello. Welcome to the latest installment of Truth Noir. I'm joined here by a new guest host today. I want to welcome Sean Humphries to the madness and debauchery that goes on here. He's new to you, but he's a veteran of all the things that go on at the Drone Box here. So, co-producer of the Rick Shapiro News Hour that comes out right after this show. So in case any of you ever fall asleep during my show and then wake up a few minutes into the next hour, this guy's responsible for some of that content.
It's just a nightmare. That's all. Really, when you wake up doing the Rick Shapiro News, it's like you're having a nightmare.
Yeah, well, but then it's kind of funny too. It's like what your nightmare would be if it were narrated by a fantastic stand-up comedian.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. That is a good point.
Yeah, so tonight, and I knew this would be something you'd be into because we've talked about stuff like this before, but there has been some new evidence coming up, or at least an anomaly in the astronomical observations of NASA that suggest that there might actually be some actual hard evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence, and I don't really hear about it getting reported, because of course we need to be worried about how Lamar Odom is doing and what the Kardashians are up to. But I think it's potentially a pretty big deal because all of the people that are, skeptics that are like, well, where's the hard evidence of aliens? It might be here. So
it's a planet that's what, 1,500 light years away?
Yeah, it's pretty far away.
But in a weird way, in galactic time, that's not that long ago. In the sense of like it could be like a round trip between their planet and ours if they have near light travel. Is only 1,500 years. They could have visited us.
Right. Yeah, and especially if
or they're on their way.
Especially if they're capable of doing some of the things that is suggested in these observations. They might be able to travel faster than light.
Yeah.
So
it's okay. So if we think of them as what are the different, like there's these different tech levels, right? That the
Right. Yeah. So before I get into that, I just wanted to put out there that what has been observed by the Kepler deep or space telescope. And for those of you who don't know, the Kepler telescope was designed and put in orbit specifically to find exoplanets, planets that are outside of our solar system. And the way it does that is it measures the difference in brightness when a planet travels in front of a star.
Okay.
So like when we have an eclipse and the moon goes in front of the sun,
we can time how far away the sun is by the duration of the eclipse.
Right, yeah, there's all kinds of information that you can glean from that. And really the least of which is that a big heavy thing moved in front of it.
Yeah.
And so that's the main thing that Kepler is looking for. If a planet travels in front of a star in its orbit, it will dim the brightness of that star by just a little bit. A planet the size of Jupiter, I was reading in an article, around a star this far away would dim the brightness of the star by about 1%. And what they're seeing here is the brightness of this star being dimmed by about 15 to 20%. And
and then wasn't there something about like if it's a Jupiter size interval, it's like it's a very regular thing that they can expect to happen every period of time, but this dimming is like has an irregular pattern to it.
Right, yeah, so that also speaks to not being a planet, because planets orbit at regular intervals, like you said.
Because of gravity and the centrifugal force of the pull of the star in the center, and blah blah blah.
Yeah, and something that is that much more massive than Jupiter to be interfering with the brightness of the star that much, that gets into the size of like being another star itself, which they haven't found evidence of. It's just like this massive thing that you know, transits at odd intervals, and so they don't know what to make of it. But there are a couple theories, and so yeah, this is a, you know, artist representation of a thing that we will discuss a little bit later that's called a Dyson sphere. But before we get to that, we want to, we gotta, you know, because the pictures are mashed all the time, we'll get to...
I like this preview.
Yeah.
We're doing a preview of the show, guys. This is what's, look at those images, are those images? It's gonna happen.
They're gonna make sense real soon. Well, and that was the thing, like those things have already happened, you know, the Google Glass and, you know, the other stuff. But what you were starting to ask before, that there are different levels of civilization. And these were determined or theorized, expounded upon by a
Physicist?
astronomer.
Just a straight, regular astronomer.
Yeah,
Okay.
Russian astronomer by the name of Kardashev, and he came up with these gradations of civilizations based on their energy consumption.
Yeah, oh, that's right, yeah. So what level one is basically, we know how to harvest the energy of the planet we're on.
Right, yeah. All of the energy that is used by the civilization comes from the resources of their home planet. And so that's basically what we are.
Yeah.
That's how we make energy. That's how, you know, all the stuff that we make is made from stuff on our planet. The next, according to Kardashev, the next evolution of civilization is to obtain all of their energy from their parent star.
Which we're just starting. I mean, in a weird way. I mean, we're not doing it in a very effective or universal way.
True, but yeah, we are starting to, you know, head towards that trend. And so I would say, like, on the Kardashev scale, we would be like maybe a type 1.1.
Oh, just one tiny little step towards
'cause
solar dependent or solar interdependence.
Yeah, because I mean, it's a far cry from, you know, getting all of our energy from the sun, but there are, you know, great strides being made in its viability and its efficiency.
One of the things I think about in terms of that as moving forward evolutionarily is using like bioengineering transportation, bioengineering, like even like other forms of energy, like making a like growing a nuclear power plant. You know, like it would maybe be a form of some kind of biostructure that's grown in the lab, and then it has a heated core. I don't know. Like I feel like that.
Well,
you know, our
sure.
next step is somewhere in that. I mean, I don't like the hard technologies myself, but that's my. You know.
Yeah, well, I mean, as it turns out, the sky's the limit. You know, I mean, so many of these things that started off as science fiction, we now use as technology. You know, less than 50 years later.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there was a third type of civilization, and our picture's a little bit big to fit on our cork board back there. But type 3 civilizations would then, you know, and this is where we talk about like colonizing other solar systems and things like that, where they would utilize the energy of an entire galaxy.
The resources and the energy sources and okay.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
So that's a little past what we're getting into.
It's weird, but you saw Interstellar, right?
Sure.
I feel like that is almost like the fantasy mythology of us being in that realm. You know, that's when Jules Verne and the Nautilus predicting subway travel. This is our imagining of what it would be like to travel into between stars.
For sure. Yeah. Well, and speaking of Jules Verne, and what book was it from? I think it was called From the Earth to the Moon.
Oh yeah.
Where it was, and that was written, I believe, pre-Civil War.
right around, like,
Or
I think, yeah,
it
he was right in that sweet spot, yeah.
certainly before we started traveling to space.
Yeah.
And, or even flying in the air of our own planet. And his predictions about the size of the moon and the distance and how long it would take to get there were pretty dead on, 100 years before we actually set foot on the moon.
Well, and the writing about the Nautilus turned into those two famous submarines in the Civil War, the
Right.
Monitor and the Merrimack, I guess. Yeah.
So yeah, and definitely, it speaks to the point of, all of these things that, we see in science fiction right now, and, well, that's kind of ridiculous. That would be cool, but, it took a generation from, and like I say, I know we keep coming back to it, so I'll show some of these pictures.
Oh, yeah.
Before Google Glass came out, by about 10 years, I think that's Star Trek Deep Space Nine.
Oh yeah, had the character that had the...
Yeah, they always had these displays, over the eye displays that you could access whatever information you wanted from it. So that was a pretty recent one that was in like the last 15 years.
And even if the communicators,
right?
The weird thing is the designers of the first cell phones were inspired by the design of the Star Trek communicators and wanted to make them look like them.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have Uhura here with her translator that she wore in her ear.
Wow.
Looks remarkably like your Bluetooth that
device.
You run all of your life from these days.
Wow.
And
that's a good point.
And yeah, just for the sake of completion, I did put a Star Trek communicator on here. This not this, of course. This is actually the Kepler space telescope that has observed these anomalous readings around this star. And it kind of looks like maybe a automobile from Mad Max from that angle.
Yeah.
But
we just need to put a guitarist shooting flames on the front.
Right.
Of it.
But yeah. So here's what we were talking about before. This was on the left. We have the old 1960s Star Trek communicator. And on the right, we have our Motorola flip phone from, 15, 20 years ago now?
Yeah.
So, yeah, the turnaround is pretty quick. It turns out it's less than 50 years.
Did you ever read any Neal Stephenson?
Yeah, I like Neal Stephenson a lot.
I think he's the person that's kind of like, I don't know, almost the closest to that bleeding. I mean, obviously, William Gibson does a lot of it too.
Sure.
But I think Stevenson kind of hits it a little bit more on the nose, especially with Cryptonomicon.
Right.
Yeah. But even the weird kind of like kind of fast food culture dominating the food supply, and how each building, each corporation becomes its own sovereign state.
Right.
It's so amazingly scary, if you know.
For sure. Yeah. Neal Stephenson is definitely one of those kind of techno prophets.
Oh, I like that.
And he's one of the, his stuff is fun. He puts it in novel form. And so, yes, you're reading a fictitious story, but his attention to detail is, and also his knowledge of, burgeoning technologies are extremely accurate. And so if you're ever looking for something to kind of introduce yourself to these concepts, Neal Stephenson's definitely a good place to start, as books like Snow Crash, Cryptonomicon. The Baroque cycle that he wrote.
Too much for me.
Yeah, no, it's a lot, but that was a sort of historical fiction that deals a lot with the interactions between the members of the Royal Society of London at the time. So that's the setting.
Oh, interesting. Interesting.
And so it's a good sort of document of the period of time, but also sort of spiced up with those people's dialogues with each other that he
Okay.
created. So,
Now let me ask you this question.
sure.
Do you think, I mean, obviously this news is coming from an academic source. Do you think that, I mean, I always wonder, in a larger kind of conspiracy milieu, and I'll call it that, is this something that we're being allowed to know, or is it something that just the scientific community just put out there without necessarily filtering themselves? Do you think, and I'm just speculating. Do you think that there was prior knowledge of this stuff before it hit the news?
Yeah, and it's one of those, rumors abound. I mean, it's fun to speculate on, but yeah, I would say,
Yeah, it is.
I would
That's my
say
favorite.
that up to a certain point, yes, this stuff is kind of filtered out over time.
Yeah.
And if you look back through the history of different things, whether it's political assassinations or false flag events that we did last week,
Yeah.
that at the time, there's all of the bullshit stories flying around and official versions that don't add up to any of the details that were reported at the time that are now coming to light, being declassified as like, well, yep, that's what it was. It was a government plotted assassination or coup d'etat or one of these things, and so I say definitely that there is that sort of trickling down of information in a great number of different areas of thought.
Yeah, because this could just be yet another kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a lens onto a different kind of, non-terrestrial event. Like I don't know necessarily what I believe about all the X-Files shit and all that jazz.
Sure.
But,
Well, I mean, there's so much garbage flying around.
Yeah.
It's hard to know
and
anyways.
I know so many people capitalize on that kind of imagery and all that, and getting just even to the facts of it is, you were showing the Dyson ball, which is to me like, or Dyson sphere, which is could be this regular event. But when I pictured it in my head when I first heard about this, I was picturing more of like these like multiple leaves that were kind of going around it, like collecting energy because of the irregular light pattern. And that I was thinking that, well, maybe this isn't the sun system. Maybe this is a sun system that's neighboring to them that they can use to harvest energy, and that their home planet is somewhere else. I was only thinking because if you're obscuring 15% of the light at these weird periodic times, like how does life on your home planet actually survive?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's one of those questions, that begs other questions.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
well, would that even be viable?
Yeah.
You would certainly have to put it, I would imagine, on the other side of the planet
Yeah.
that you're living on.
Oh yeah, so you
to-
have the planets on one
Yeah,
side.
to kind of angle it back.
And
maybe,
then
or
maybe
something.
the irregular pattern has maybe got like a kind of like a C shape to it, where the planet only needs it's like a flashlight. It only needs
Sure.
a little bit of it, and so the rest of the sun could be obscured except for that one part that's going over the planet.
Right, or they could be different structures entirely.
Yeah.
That, because most stars don't give out the same amount of energy all the time. Certain parts of the star
they
could
could
be,
be getting different things.
bursting. You have sunspots, and those
Yeah.
places are not quite as active as far as,
Also,
energy output.
the thing that just popped in my head when you described that was maybe there's different corporate entities, like business
Harvesting
entities
energy. Yeah,
that
sure.
are vying for different space. Because
That could
if
be
you think
too.
of all the garbage that's up in our space, they're just kind of a delicate balance of not running into each other all the time.
Right,
I mean,
and like you said, they are all owned by different corporations.
Yeah.
There's not really any public interest.
there's no space UN.
Right. Yeah, not yet at least. The UN hasn't infiltrated, interorbital
Could you
space
imagine
yet.
little surf mobiles in space, like giving tickets to the satellites? You were out of your lane.
Yeah, right.
But I mean, but eventually we will have to have. I mean, right now it's kind of an agreed upon, like usage up there where we don't actually, you don't have like a satellite killer going up and mashing up other people's satellites. And there's a lot of garbage out there, but not so much that it's like the 405.
Right. Yeah, and it's also there's also relatively very few countries involved in putting satellites up there, anyways, and so the governments of those nations regulate and cooperate with each other and help fix each other's shit when necessary.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when you're out there, I mean, it's like you're going to be each other's AAA out in space.
Right.
Yeah, but to me, it's such a fascinating, imaginative exercise thinking about what kind of culture, what kind of life forms, what kind of, and then can they see us? Like, are we exhibiting anything from our star system that is exhibitable that far away? Are we being spied on by them?
Right. Yeah. Well, and that turns into another, and since I think this we can get into the Drake equation.
Hey,
and so
not the hip hop guy.
No, not the Drake you've been hearing about on the news that is having a squabble with some other irrelevant dipshit.
I just love the idea. No, but I love the idea that somebody might be looking into that dipshit and learn something on this show.
Right. Yeah. I'll have to put Drake the rapper in the tags.
Exactly.
On this.
Exactly.
But yeah. So So let's see. We had your comment about are we perceptible to them? And if they are only like passively listening, at this distance, I would say probably not, because if you consider that the transmissions that you make, yes, they travel at light speed, but how long have we been making them for?
And it's almost like I want to say like it's a scatter shot, because once you send something out into deep space, the linearity of it could just miss so many objects for so far.
Right. So we've been making radio transmissions for about 100 years. About. If you count telegraph clicks, maybe 150 years or something like that. But to help clarify that, of course, from this ridiculous-looking equation, we're going to get clarity from it, and this is why people they shut down when they think about this shit, because there's equations like this that.
But I will be the dumb guy, and if you can explain this, if you could make my dense brain understand it.
Sure. Okay, so at the far left of this equation, marked N after myself, of course.
The norm.
That is
total norm core.
So that variable represents the number of civilizations in our galaxy with which we might be able to communicate.
Okay.
And so the other variables on the other side of the equal sign are there to help us figure out what number N might possibly be. And so these
are just different factors that are, I'll just in my head think of it as different ways of filtering down from 1 billion planets or billions and billions of planets to a reasonable number.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, so, I'll read off each variable. So the first one is the average rate of star formation per year in our galaxy. Okay, well, that we can figure out pretty close. The next one is the fraction of stars with planets. Not all stars have planets. We can assume that if a star doesn't have planets, it's not going to have life around it, right?
Life
that we could communicate.
I guess it's planet-based.
That might possibly look like us, and think about doing the same shit we do.
In a weird way, I'm just going to take a little tributary.
Sure.
Because I feel like that second number is a very planet-centric bias. You know,
True.
and I'm only saying it from the standpoint of, and how long ago did Drake live? When did he come up with this?
A lot of these guys, the conjectures they came up with are about between like 50 and 100 years.
Yeah, once we started pointing our lenses at the sky.
Yeah, with the advent of SETI and programs that dedicated themselves to this, we had people, putting equations together and being like, well, should we even realistically be able to expect an answer?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Let's see. So we had.
I just reading so much fiction. That's the first thing that pops up. And also, if you
sure.
think of 2001, that was just a baby hanging in space, right?
Right.
It was behind Jupiter, but it was just a baby in space.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, well, what do you make of that?
Stanley Kubrick was very creative, or Isaac Asimov. Who wrote the original 2001?
Oh, geez, you're killing me here. So Stanley Kubrick directed the film. I believe 2001 was written by.
Oh, darn, are you gonna look it up?
Yeah, I'm going
killing
to.
You.
But yeah, so go ahead and read some of these other variables.
Yeah, so the formation of stars with planets. Okay, we talked about that. And then N is the average number of planets that can potentially support life. So we've got 1 in 9. So like if we just take Earth as an example, so our star was born, a couple billion years ago. The planets, 9 of them showed up, but then only 1 of them can support life, unless you look at the Mars theory, whatever's going on over there. Maybe a dead civilization that we ran from when things got shitty. Okay, then
right.
Fi is the fraction that can go on to support life. Oh, yes.
Arthur C. Clarke.
Clarke, that's what it is. Thank you. Oh, man. Yes, exactly, of course. So there's only a certain period of time where any planet is going to support life. Like ours has only been doing it for
a couple billion years.
Yeah.
And then because stars they die off after a while, or they explode, or they expand and incinerate the inner planets that would have been able to support life. So you have to take that into consideration.
Fi. Fraction that can go on to support intelligent life. Oh,
yep.
That's a good point.
Yeah, because some of them get hit by asteroids and destroyed.
Or also maybe it's just a planet of like dumb wildebeest animals that can't.
That are not going to go anywhere. Is the fraction of civilizations that develop a technology detectable from space. So this would be like our radio waves. And maybe they don't want to talk to us because all they're getting these days is, Kardashians and
news.
Real Housewives and, whatever Donald Trump is saying. Like, fuck this place.
Well, here's the weird thing. Like, I feel like you put Donald Trump on TV enough and it will scare away any alien invasions. They're gonna be like, oh fuck, we don't want to fuck with those people. It's a bunch of brutal idiots.
Yeah, they're insane. They won't give up. They'll just talk, and our heads will explode like in fucking Martian.
Mars attacks.
Mars attacks.
That's right.
And then finally, our last one: the length of time such civilizations release detectable signs into space. Because their communications, they might evolve technology that allows them to communicate telepathically,
and then they stop sending signals out.
Right.
Yeah.
So over time, we have been able to, either through educated guesses or now by observation, been able to plug in a few more of these variables. And, I'd rather be thinking about this kind of stuff than, the ridiculousness that, we get bombarded with all the time.
I don't know if you remember Timothy Leary at the height of his acid taking.
Sure.
And I appreciated his writings. Said it's to him the point of human civilization was smile, space migration, increased intelligence, and life extension.
Sure.
And I actually, I think that those are noble goals. I also read this great article yesterday or the day before talking about how some scientists believe that we have an obligation to seed the universe or migrate into the universe because we may be the potential farmers or creators of other life forms, and that our ability to kind of expand ourselves in the human family might keep the universe from ending. Like we might be able to find a technology that will keep the universe from collapsing in on itself.
Sure.
And that they were basically saying that we have a moral obligation to extend our lives and go out into space. And I was like, I love that argument. It's a kind of a hopeful,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, I mean, it asks the question, like, what if we are the only ones?
Yeah.
What if,
If we are, then I had this an amazing mushroom journey that answered that question, and that it all just fades away to nothing, and there was kind of no point to all of this. And I think if whatever it is in the human soul, the human consciousness, the kind of adventure or explorer vibe, or in the way that we've grown this giant brain pan that just keeps on like squishing in on itself and making more connections and more connections.
Sure.
And then the way we're able to extend our intelligence through our technology, it actually feels in a weird way like some kind of religious destiny that we leave the planet and conquer the universe. You know what I mean? Like that somehow we're designed for it.
Well, yeah, and if you believe, whatever creation myth is your favorite, because there are certain commonalities in all of them, and I want to do a show on comparative religion one of these days.
Comparative creation myths.
Yeah,
that's a fascinating place.
But to put it very briefly, they all basically say that our rules, our creator, whatever it is that brought us about, came from somewhere else. Or these ethics are handed down by something benevolent, and so if it says
heavenly or other planet or otherworldly,
and so if it says go forth and multiply and follow the highest ideals of whatever I sent down in human form to guide all you assholes,
Now let me ask you though. Like, I mean, I think about this a lot in kind of the world making or playing God idea. How would you figure out a way to communicate? Let's just say that whoever these beings are, if they seeded the planet or whatever it was, they are at least more ancient. They have a more continuous kind of cultural connection that was allowed them to leave their planet or come here.
Sure.
So they're probably smarter, more technologically advanced. What system would you use? Let's say maybe we're bioengineered. Is there something in the bioengineering, in the DNA, that causes us to want to have a creation myth? You see where I'm going with that?
Right.
Yeah. How would you,
yeah.
if you were God, how would you design it?
Well, yeah, and it's a fantastic question. Like, what was the intent?
Yeah.
Because
look at the labs that we're doing all this GMO stuff, which is really just genetic hybridization. And
right.
Some people would claim that we're a genetic hybridization between a Cro-Magnon and some kind of other outside genetic force, either alien or otherwise. That at some point we became so different from the other life forms around us that we ended up dominating the planet.
Right. Well, that is the focal point of mainly the Sumerian creation myth.
Oh yeah. That's right.
There are many parallels between the Sumerian creation myth and the Judeo-Christian creation myth, but what's missing between those two is the reason for creation, and that was to basically create a labor force.
Yeah. So yeah, we're the slave planet.
Whereas in the Judeo-Christian one, we were created to be the caretakers of
Exaltation,
paradise.
yeah,
right?
and the greatest creation of God and all that.
Right.
Like, look at how badass I am.
And so, yeah, yeah, fuck you, Satan. You can't even begin to do this shit.
I'm making boys and girls, and they make more themselves.
I don't even need to do shit anymore.
Exactly. This is a business plan where he's like, I'm going to be making humans in my sleep. They can slave labor or not. I don't care. But all they need to do is worship me all the time.
Right. Yeah.
So
sing songs and cut off the tip of your dick and
so that's
and
really,
don't pick up sticks on Saturday or else I'll fucking murder you.
and wear mixed. Yeah, don't wear mixed fibers. But I still love the idea though that if the Anunnaki were trying to turn us into slaves, the Yahwehs were trying, basically like they were trying to make groupies.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's where it seems to me, and I mean, and this is strictly a personal opinion.
Yeah.
It seems to me that like all of the like righteous teaching stuff, the be kind and take care of the least privileged among you, and like all of the great teachings that your best world religions preach and tell you to do, has somewhere along the line been corrupted.
Yes.
And stuff has been added to it, and the priest class at a certain point in time became extortionists.
Yeah.
Basically, and
So then, like folding this back into this new star system.
Yeah, sure.
Is the
I hope they're not dicks.
Yeah, I hope they're not dicks, but I'd also say is our scientific priest class, meaning the guys that hold the telescopes, the ones that are interpreting these signs for us,
Right,
that just as the ancient Aztec priests knew when a lunar eclipse was going to happen, and they could manipulate the masses to do their bidding and whatever.
Right. Yeah.
I can't imagine NASA or whoever it is that releases information is yanking our emotional chain, and also just the way it was released. It was released in the, because I've been thinking for years, like, okay, if there are aliens out there, at some point they're going to have to tell us about it, and how are they going to push the message? Like, how are they going to be like, by the way, guys, we've been knowing about this for a while.
Well, yeah, and it's like they found water on Mars the same weekend that
the Martian
movie came out. That being said, I feel like it lends itself to what we were talking about before, that kind of drip feeding of disclosure, and people would the massive people have given a shit if they found water on Mars
at any other time of the year?
Yeah, if there wasn't a entertaining piece of media to accompany it.
Yeah, I also would say, like, maybe on the conspiracy side of it, maybe Warner Brothers or whoever made The Martian donated a whole shit ton of money to NASA to say, hey, we, because I actually remember like 6 or 8 months ago, there was talk of this water on Mars, like just the hints of like, oh, we've got some really interesting findings, and then it kind of dried up. I'm sorry, I had to use that pun.
Pardon the pun.
But that may be somebody in there, and I would say on some level, it's a brilliant level of marketing, and it benefits NASA by being able to get them some, non-traditional funding if they were in collusion with them, which. As far as being I'm a creature of Hollywood, I would much rather see the dramatic exploration of the idea of water on Mars by accompanying it with the movie thing, rather than it be kind of like, oh, then this is another thing that happened in the news,
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, whatever gets people looking up instead of
I'm sorry, guys.
Yeah, we thank you for this current hour of your attention.
But look over there.
But yeah, but in general, you know, look up a little bit more, and you'll find more inspiration and you know, thought-provoking stuff than the vast majority of stuff you'd
Yeah, don't look
see
here.
on TV, right?
Look out there. Yeah.
So yeah, Neal Stephenson. I'm glad you brought him up, but I was thinking as more of a kind of documentarian sort of thing.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring up this guy, Ray
Oh, yeah.
Kurzweil, and he. Speaking of techno prophets, him and Neal Stephenson have kind of been on par with each other.
Well, I feel like they're
as-
the two sides of the fiction nonfiction. Because
Right.
obviously Ray is speculating. He's speculating from knowledge. He's not a blind speculator. But what the stuff he's talking about is still fantasy. I mean, you know.
You know, at the times that he's written it, I would say yes.
Yeah.
But like over the course of his publications, his projected timelines have been almost perfect for the implementation of these certain things,
The technologies that he's talking about.
the reaching of certain technological, you know, milestones.
Okay.
Right up there with I don't remember his first name, but Moore's law.
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
the guy that was talking about, well, you know, we can expect computer chips to be this much more efficient
Smaller, yeah.
and cost this much less over, you know, regular periods of time. And so Ray Kurzweil, in this book specifically, puts together all of these concepts that we've been talking, well, not quite all of them, but he does, you know, bring up the, you know, sci-fi gear that has become, you know, common practice, you know, use technology. And also he talks about the progression of civilizations, you know, from the Kardashev model, and the gadgetry that advanced civilizations might use to harvest the energy that they need to, you know, continue to do these, you know, more and more ambitious things. And so it's called The Singularity is Near. And
How do you feel about it? I mean, I haven't read it, but I have a pretty good grasp of what he's trying to say, and that at a certain point, our reality will be indistinguishable from a simulation, and when we reach that technological marriage between kind of our technologies of replication and our inability to distinguish from them, that we might as well be in a computer simulation, you know.
Sure. Well, you know, there's certain speculation out there by, you know, theoretical scientists, and you know, that are already saying that the further, you know, smaller scale, further and further down you look, it appears that the universe itself, on a fundamental level, is holographic.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't worry about it too much,
Right.
because, like, you can't see that far down anyway.
There's that number one. It's like, and it's, to me, it's like it is a certain kind of mythology.
But I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like, are you also getting at are we really human anymore if we
Have become this kind of technological, you know, whatever hybrid. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, he addresses it as, you know, okay, well, look what we have right now. We have, you know, if you cut off an arm and you have a prosthetic, you're still human.
Yeah.
Right. If you have a heart problem and there is a electric device that can regulate your heart function, you're still human. You know, and he extrapolates that to, okay, well, we can already replace most of the human body.
Yeah.
And so and he goes into that question a lot with some, like, fictional dialogues, you know, between various characters. And, you know, and he really does a good job. You might not agree with his particular leaning,
Sure.
but he does investigate that topic pretty fully into, like, well, what does it mean to be human? What are the requirements? And so, yeah, there's a lot of that kind of conjecture that he puts in.
And one of the things that I think of in terms of, like, again, I saw this short documentary about how all these different like there are horses are not as popular as they were back 100 years ago because we got cars, and so there were millions of horses around, and now there's thousands of horses around, and like they were trying to compare the work power of a horse between the workforce of humans, and that eventually all of these things will go away. And I think that for me, and I always say, I always try to slice the predictions and the mythology in a way that my consciousness continues into the future, and that's all
For sure.
It's kind of selfish. That's kind of all I care about,
Well, yeah, and I don't think that's too far out. I mean, all of this technology, and this is a topic that he addresses too. All of this technology, like the goal is basically like complete unemployment.
Yeah.
Like, why not have machines do everything that we need to do? You weren't made to alphabetize insurance files.
Yeah.
People have stress because they have a fucking boring, worthless job that they do only to exist comfortably
to pay their
on the
rent
planet
or whatever.
And it's one of those things where, like, yes, all this technology will accomplish that eventually, whether it's to our detriment or not. And what will be detrimental about it is if our kind of societal paradigm doesn't change from this, well, you're a lazy piece of shit, you don't deserve
anything.
You don't deserve to not be homeless, to instead, okay, well, what do you want to do? What do you want to study? How do you want to develop yourself? And so we're running about the end of our show here.
God, it moved so fast.
Yeah, man, but I think we got to everything. So yeah, in closing, you guys, there's interesting stuff going on, and it's far more interesting than the gossip you're hearing on TMZ. No disrespect to Harvey Levin if he ever wants to give me a job, but yeah, keep looking up. If you're into brushing up on this stuff, look into Neal Stephenson and Ray Kurzweil and
Arthur C. Clarke.
Arthur C. Clarke, as it turns out. You'll be a hell of a lot smarter than you were the day before. So, Godspeed. I want to say thanks to Sean Humphries for sharing the stage with me. And in closing, you guys, wherever you're going, get there safe. Catch you next time.